The radio stopped working just before the sun came up. 1,000 Marines were stuck in a frozen valley. They were surrounded by enemies. There were way more bad guys than them. The leaders in charge had given up on them. The rules were clear. All snipers were told to leave. No one could stay behind. From a faraway hill, two sisters heard the order. Then they looked at each other. If they did what they were told, the whole group of soldiers would die by morning. If they stayed, they would become like ghosts that no one would find. They turned off their radios. They moved to different spots. And they waited for the sun to come up. When morning came, everything changed. The temperature had dropped to 14 degrees below zero. Tiny ice crystals formed on everything outside. The valley looked like a shiny mirror of death. Captain Rachel Hartwell pressed her eye against her rifle scope. She watched what was happening 3,000 yards below her. 1,000 Marines, maybe even more, were spread across the valley floor. They looked like game pieces on a board game that was already lost. They had walked into a trap 6 hours ago. The whole 3rd Battalion had been moving through an area that the smart people said was safe. But the smart people were wrong. The enemy had been waiting there. They were as patient as winter itself. They let the Marines spread out thin before they closed the trap. Now the Marines were stuck. No helicopters could come because the weather was too bad. No big guns could help because they were too far away. No rescue was coming because the leaders had already decided these soldiers were okay to lose. Rachel could see the Marines digging holes in the ground. They made small fighting spots carved out of frozen dirt. They hid behind rocks and broken equipment. They were getting ready for the attack that would come when the sun rose. The enemy always attacked at sunrise. That was their way of doing things. It was going to happen for sure. Next to her, about 40 feet away on the rocky hill, her sister waited. Lieutenant Sarah Hartwell had the same scope, the same rifle, and the same view of the valley below. They had been dropped here 72 hours ago to watch and gather information. 2 snipers worked on the high ground, learning about where the enemy was moving. They had done their job. They had reported everything they saw. But then the battalion walked into trouble anyway. The radio made a crackling sound one last time. The voice was far away and breaking up through the air. All sniper teams, this is Overwatch Command. Do Protocol 7. I say again, do Protocol 7. Go back to pickup point Delta. Say yes if you understand. This was the emergency order to leave. No questions. No waiting. No exceptions. Rachel's finger hovered over the talk button. All around the valley, she knew other sniper teams were already packing up. They were already moving through the dark towards safety. Protocol 7 meant there was no hope. It meant the leaders were cutting their losses. It meant everyone who could leave should leave right now. She looked at her sister. Sarah was already looking back at her. Through her scope, Rachel watched a young Marine. He couldn't have been older than 19. He was trying to dig deeper into the frozen ground. His digging tool made sparks when it hit the hard frozen dirt. He was crying. She could see that even from 3,000 yards away. Crying and digging and waiting for morning. We have to answer, Rachel said quietly. Her breath made little clouds that disappeared quickly in the wind. Sarah didn't answer right away. She was counting things in her head. Rachel knew what she was thinking about. Angles, distances, wind speed, how cold it was. All the things that turn math into life or death. They'll die, Sarah finally said. All of them. By 7 in the morning, that valley becomes a graveyard. The rules are the rules, Rachel said. The rules were written by people who aren't watching this happen. Rachel closed her eyes. She had been in the Marines for 12 years. Sarah had been in for 11. They had followed orders through 3 big missions for different places around the world and more jobs than they could count. They had never once broken the rules. That was what made them professionals, not cowboys. That was what kept people alive. Except now, following the rules meant people would die. Just not them. If we stay, Rachel said carefully, we could go to military jail. Our careers would be over. Maybe worse. If we leave, we have to live with ourselves for the rest of our lives. Down in the valley, the young Marine had stopped digging. He sat with his back against a small hole. His rifle was across his knees. He stared at the eastern sky, where light would soon appear. Rachel made her choice. She reached down and turned off her radio. The small green light that had been glowing for 72 hours went dark. With that, her career, her future, and maybe her freedom went away too. Sarah watched her sister's hand move. Then she reached for her own radio. Click. Darkness. Silence. 2 positions, Sarah said. As far apart as we can get. Our shooting areas should overlap. You take the south side. I'll cover the north. Save your bullets. Only shoot the leaders. Make every shot count. They had worked together for so long that making plans only took seconds. Each one knew what the other would do before they even said it. They had shared their mother's belly before they shared a battlefield. Some connections are deeper than any rule book. Sarah began crawling backward from her spot. She dragged her rifle and gear bag with her. She would go around to the south, find a new hiding place, and set up her angle. They wouldn't talk to each other again except through their actions. Every time one of them fired their gun would be like a conversation. Every enemy they took down would be like a sentence in a language only they understood. Rachel adjusted her scope. The enemy was out there beyond the edge of the valley, hiding in their own spots. She could see a little movement here and there, a shadow moving, someone standing up carelessly against the white snow. They felt sure of themselves. They had more people. They had a better position. They had time. They didn't know about the sisters on the ridge. The eastern skies slowly started changing from black to gray. Somewhere behind enemy lines, officers would be checking their watches, looking over their attack plans, and getting their fighters ready for the final attack. They would move at sunrise because that's when offenders are most tired, most scared, and most likely to give up. Rachel settled into her position. She controlled her breathing. She became part of the rock, part of the ice, part of the wind itself. This was a zone where thinking disappeared and instinct took over. This was where training turned into pure focus. Through her scope, she found her first target, an enemy officer 3,200 yards away. He was moving between positions like someone who believed no one could reach him. He carried himself differently than the soldiers around him. He had power in the way he stood. He gave commands with his hands. Rachel adjusted for the wind, for the cold temperature, and for the curve of the earth itself. At this distance, her finger found the trigger. The young Marine down in the valley was still staring at the horizon, waiting for the light that would bring his death. Rachel breathed out slowly and waited for her sister to be ready, because when they started this, there would be no stopping, no second chances, no way to go back. The radio silence wasn't just broken. It was smashed to pieces. They had crossed a line that no rule could uncross. 1,000 Marines were about to find out what 2 women could do when they decided that some orders were meant to be ignored. Rachel and Sarah Hartwell had been born 18 minutes apart in a military hospital outside of 29 Palms. Their father, Sergeant Major James Hartwell, had been out working when their mother went into labor. He made it back just in time to meet his daughters through the nursery window. He was still wearing his combat boots and desert uniform. He raised them alone after their mother left. Some women couldn't handle the life. The long times away. The not knowing. The long silences broken only by short phone calls from places that couldn't be named. Their mother had lasted 4 years before the loneliness became too much for her to stay. James never said bad things about her. He simply folded her absence into their daily routine and moved forward. That was the Marine way. Adapt and overcome. The twins grew up in base housing and deployment cycles. They learned to read by studying their father's military books. They learned geography through the places he was sent. Kosovo, Iraq, Afghanistan, back to Iraq. Each time he left meant months of waiting, of checking lists of hurt soldiers while holding their breath, of jumping at every knock on the door. They learned something else too. They learned that some people run toward danger while others run away. And they learned which kind of person they wanted to be. James taught them to shoot when they were 12 years old, not just for fun, but with the same careful method he used for everything. Breathing, trigger control, reading the wind, understanding how bullets fly. He taught them that shooting wasn't about violence. It was about math made real. Every bullet was a problem to be solved. The sisters took to it in different ways. Rachel approached shooting like a math equation. She studied charts about bullets, memorized wind formulas, and kept detailed notes about every shot. Her targets had perfect center hits. Her shooting was consistent, predictable, and excellent. Sarah shot by feel. She could sense when the wind was about to change before it happened. She understood how bullets drop through instinct rather than math. Her shots landed even closer together than Rachel's, but she couldn't always explain how she did it. She just knew. James recognized what he had. Two different ways to solve the same problem. Rachel's precision and Sarah's instinct. Together, they could reach levels that neither could reach alone. When they turned 18, they joined the Marines together. Same day, same person signed them up, same promise they made. James stood in the back of the ceremony. He was 42 years old with 24 years of service. He watched his daughters begin the journey he had walked before them. He went to Helmand Province 6 months later. A hidden bomb in an irrigation ditch. The explosion took him and 3 others. By the time the twins got permission to go to the funeral, he had already been buried with full honors at Arlington Cemetery. Sarah wanted to quit that day. She wanted to walk away from the military, from the wars, from all of it. Rachel talked her down during the long night after the funeral. They sat on cheap hotel beds in their dress uniforms, sharing a bottle of whiskey their father would never drink. He didn't die for nothing, Rachel said. He died doing what he believed in. Walking away doesn't honor that. Finishing what we started honors it. Sarah nodded, drunk and sad and angry at a world that takes fathers and gives back folded flags. They went back to their units. They trained harder. They volunteered for every school, every test, every chance to get better at the skill their father had taught them. Scout Sniper School came 3 years into their service. The course failed 93% of people who tried. Most people broke during the crawling exercises. They had to crawl through bushes for hours, moving just a few yards at a time, try to get close enough to watch towers without being seen. Or they broke during the shooting tests where anything less than perfect meant failure. Rachel and Sarah didn't break. They finished first and second in their class. Rachel's written tests were the highest scores in the school's history. Sarah's field work set records that still stood. The teachers struggled to rank them because they were excellent in different ways. Eventually, they gave up and simply wrote that the Hartwell sisters were a complete sniper package split across 2 bodies. Their reputation spread quickly through the sniper community. Twin sisters, both qualified, both deadly, both carrying their father's memory like a rifle strap across their shoulders. They went together to Kandahar, then Mosul, then places that never made the news. They worked as a team, which was unusual. Sniper rules said individuals should hide and shoot alone. But their commanders quickly learned that the Hartwell sisters got results. Enemy officers who thought they were safe behind their lines would simply drop. Hidden weapon stashes that had stayed hidden for months would suddenly be found with exact locations. The sisters saw things others missed. They communicated without talking. A decade of shared life meant they had developed a language of looks and small movements more exact than radio talk. In the field, they could plan complicated moves with nothing more than eye contact. But they were different people beneath the shared job. Rachel believed in rules. Rules existed for reasons. Hard lessons learned through blood and failure. She had gotten in trouble twice during her career. Both times for refusing orders she believed put her team in danger through bad planning. She would break rules, but only after carefully thinking about what would happen. For her, breaking rules was a calculated risk, not a sudden decision. Sarah believed in results. She would follow rules that made sense and ignore ones that didn't. She had gotten in trouble 5 times. Twice for ignoring orders to move, so she could keep watching over friendly soldiers. Once for shooting at targets outside her assigned area. Twice for refusing to leave while friendly forces were still in danger. For Sarah, the mission was whatever kept people alive, no matter what the order said. Their differences had led to where they were now. Rachel was a captain on track for promotion, respected by the leaders. Sarah was still a lieutenant, passed over twice for promotion, seen as talented but not reliable. James would have understood both of them. He had raised them to think for themselves, to question authority when authority was wrong. But he had also taught them that the military was bigger than any one person, and that discipline kept the line between order and chaos. Now, on a frozen ridge above a valley of dying Marines, those different ways of thinking were coming together toward the same choice. Rachel, who believed in rules, was breaking them. Sarah, who trusted her gut, was trusting her sister's judgment. And somewhere in the space between those decisions, 1,000 lives hung in the balance. The sky kept slowly getting brighter. Gray became pearl, became the first hints of gold. Sarah had reached her southern position by now. Rachel couldn't see her, but she knew, the same way she always knew where her sister was. Even in darkness, even in chaos. They had 17 minutes until sunrise. 17 minutes to get ready for a battle they couldn't win, but couldn't walk away from. Rachel checked how many bullets she had. 47 rounds. Sarah would have the same. 94 rounds total between them. The enemy had at least 2,000 fighters around the valley rim. The math was impossible, but math had never stopped them before. Rachel remembered something their father had said during one of those childhood shooting lessons. He watched them shoot box after box of bullets on the range. Shooting isn't about the bullets you have. It's about the fear you create with the bullets you place. Make them afraid of the dark. Make them afraid of distance. Make them believe they're fighting ghosts. That was the game now. Not killing 2,000 fighters. Creating the trick that help had arrived. That the Marines below weren't alone. That someone was there to save them on the ridge. Through her scope, Rachel found the enemy officer again. He was closer now, moved forward to watch his troops get ready. Confident, careless. She centered her crosshairs on his chest. Then she moved up just a little bit to his head, because this first shot had to be perfect. It had to be shocking. It had to make everyone watching believe that something impossible had just happened. Sarah would be aiming at her own target now. Some other officer, some other leader. They would shoot within seconds of each other, not planned by watch or signal, but by that deeper rhythm they shared. The enemy officer stood up straight, turned, and showed his side clearly against the morning sky. Rachel breathed in, held it, and let her heart beat slow to a steady drum. She was someone who had accepted what would happen next. The young Marine in the valley was standing now. She could see him out of the corner of her eye. Just a kid, rifle in hand, waiting for the sunrise that would bring the attack. 15 minutes to dawn. Rachel's finger completed its squeeze on the trigger. The rifle fired, and 3,200 yards away, an enemy officer who'd been planning his attack suddenly lost the ability to plan anything at all. The war for the valley had begun. The bullet took 3.7 seconds to travel from Rachel's rifle to the target. In that time, the officer moved a little bit. Not enough to matter much, but enough that the bullet hit 2 inches lower than Rachel had aimed. It hit him in the throat instead of the head. Through her scope, she watched him fall. She watched the spray of blood that looked black in the early morning light. She watched the soldiers around him scatter, diving for cover, not sure where death had come from. 2 seconds later, another officer fell on the southern side. Sarah's shot, center of the chest. Perfect like a textbook. The enemy troops were now confused and scared. Officers were yelling orders at a threat they couldn't see. Soldiers were looking at the ridgelines with the panicked movements of hunted animals. They had been getting ready to attack. And suddenly they were the ones being attacked. Rachel worked the bolt on her rifle. The empty shell casing popped out and spun away into the dark. She loaded another bullet and was already looking for her next target before the brass shell hit the stone. The rules of sniper work were clear. 1 shot, 1 kill, then move to a new spot. Never fire twice from the same place. The enemy would figure out where your gun flash came from, call in bombs or other snipers, and you would die in a hole you were too stubborn to leave. But the rules assumed you had somewhere else to go. They assumed you wanted to survive more than complete the mission. They assumed you weren't trying to save 1,000 Marines with 94 bullets. Rachel stayed where she was and found her second target. A squad leader was getting his troops organized, pointing toward the valley floor. He was good at getting his people together, bringing back order. That made him a problem. She shot him through the chest. He fell backward, and the soldiers he had been directing scattered again. The confusion was spreading like ripples across a pond. 3 commanders down in 90 seconds. No one knew how many snipers they were facing. No one knew where the shots were coming from. No one wanted to be the 4th officer to die. Sarah fired again. Rachel couldn't see the target, but she recognized the rhythm of her sister's shooting. Steady, careful, making every bullet count. Down in the valley, the Marines were starting to realize something was happening. Rachel could see them pointing at the enemy positions, watching the chaos spread to the other side. They didn't know what was causing it, but they knew the attack hadn't come yet, and that was hope where none had existed before. A radio made a crackling sound. Not Rachel's radio, which she had turned off, but the enemy's radio channel. She had a scanner in her gear bag, set to pick up common frequencies. The voice was frantic, speaking a language she didn't need to understand. They were reporting snipers. Multiple snipers. Long-range, accurate fire. Leaders getting killed. Good. Let them believe in many snipers. Let them believe they were facing a whole group of ghosts instead of 2 women who were willing to die. Rachel moved her aim to the eastern approach. The sun was almost up now, painting the horizon in shades of orange and gold. Beautiful morning for dying. She found a group of soldiers setting up a heavy machine gun. That weapon could tear the Marines below to pieces once the attack began. The crew was working well. Gunner, helper, bullet carrier. Well trained. She shot the gunner first. He fell across the weapon. The helper reached for him, tried and pull him away, and Sarah's rifle spoke from the south. The helper crumpled. The bullet carrier looked around wildly, then left the gun and ran. Smart choice. For minutes until sunrise. The enemy was supposed to be attacking by now. Instead, they were stuck because of an invisible threat they couldn't find or fight back against. But they had resources. Rachel and Sarah didn't. Within seconds of the machine gun crew going down, Rachel heard a new sound. The distinctive thump-thump of mortars being set up. They weren't aiming at the valley anymore. They were aiming at the ridge. The first mortar shell landed 300 yards south of Rachel's position. Too far to hurt her, but close enough to show they were guessing where she was. The second shell landed closer, 200 yards. They were walking their fire along the ridge, try to make her run or kill her by covering the whole area. Rachel didn't move. Moving would give away her position more surely than staying still. She pressed herself flat against the rock and kept shooting. A squad leader organizing his troops. Gone. A soldier with a radio, probably the one calling in those mortars. Gone. A fighter trying to drag a wounded friend to safety. She paused on that one. Shooting wounded people or those helping them broke the rules of war. But he was also carrying a rifle. He was also part of the enemy force. And she couldn't afford to be kind when 1,000 Marines were depending on her bullets. She shot him in the leg. Not deadly, but enough to take him out of the fight. A deal she made with her conscience. The mortars were getting closer. Sarah would be facing the same problem. They couldn't stay in these spots much longer, but they couldn't leave either. Moving meant losing their angles, losing how effective they were, losing the trick that the ridge was filled with defenders. Rachel made a decision. She turned her radio back on, not to talk to command. She had burned that bridge, but the Marines in the valley would be listening to their radio channel. She pressed a talk button and spoke quietly, calmly, like someone in complete control. Any Marine receiving this message, this is Overwatch. You have sniper support on the ridge. Stay in your positions. Help is coming. Sunrise plan is active. Answer if you hear me. Silence for 3 seconds. Then a voice, young and shaking with emotion. Overwatch, this is 3rd Battalion Actual. We hear you. We thought we were alone. Rachel's throat got tight. You're not alone, battalion. Hold your positions. Make them pay for every yard. We've got your back. Who are you? Ghosts, Rachel said, and turned the radio back off. She went back to shooting. The mortars were landing in a pattern now, moving north along the ridge. They would reach her position in the next round. She could stay and die, or move and break the trick. Sarah made the choice for her. Another shot from the south, but this one wasn't aimed at enemy troops. It was aimed at the mortar position itself. 3,500 yards. Extreme range. Shooting at a target she could probably barely see. The bullet hit one of the mortar tubes dead center. Rachel didn't know if Sarah had been aiming for the tube or the crew, but what happened was amazing. The mortar shell that had been loaded into the tube exploded, and the entire position blew up in a chain of more explosions. The mortar fire stopped. Rachel allowed herself a small smile. That was Sarah. When the rules said hide and wait, she said attack the problem directly. The sun broke over the horizon. Golden light spilled across the valley floor, lighting up 1,000 Marines who had survived to see it. They were beaten up, exhausted, probably low on bullets, but they were alive, and the attack that was supposed to come at dawn hadn't come. Instead, the enemy was reorganizing, taking losses, trying to figure out how to fight an enemy they couldn't see. Rachel looked across the valley rim through her scope. She counted at least 30 bodies. Enemy soldiers and officers who would never see another sunset. Sarah had probably got another 15 or 20 on the southern side. 45 enemy down. 49 bullets used between them. 1,955 enemy fighters still left. 45 bullets left. The math still didn't work. But the thinking was shifting. The enemy had been confident, sure of winning. Now they were afraid. Fear was a weapon more powerful than any bullet. Through her scope, Rachel saw something that made her heart drop. Vehicles moving toward the valley from the east. Not enemy backup. These were different, bigger, moving in the special pattern of a military convoy. For one terrible moment, she thought command had sent tanks to finish what the ambush started. Then she recognized the shapes. American vehicles. Backup for the Marines below. Someone had changed the retreat order. Or the Marine situation had become more important. Or some officer somewhere had decided 1,000 lives were worth the risk after all. Help was coming. Real help with tanks and soldiers and all the things that Rachel and Sarah didn't have. They had bought enough time. The Marines would survive. Rachel pressed her radio button one last time. 3rd Battalion, Overwatch. Tank column coming from the east. They'll be there in 15 minutes. Stay in position and get ready for friends to arrive. Overwatch, we hear you. Thank you. Whoever you are, thank you. Rachel didn't answer. She packed up her rifle and began the process of leaving her position. Sarah would be doing the same from the south. They needed to be gone before the backup arrived. Before anyone asked questions about who had been providing sniper support, they had saved 1,000 Marines. And in doing so, they had ended their careers. The escape took hours. Rachel moved like smoke across the ridge, using every dip in the ground and every shadow to hide her movement. The enemy was still out there, still dangerous, still hunting for the snipers who had destroyed their attack. She covered 3 miles in 4 hours, moving at the speed of being careful rather than being fast. Sarah would be going the same direction, on the southern slope. They had planned this during their first arrival. Multiple escape routes, coded meeting points, backup plans for backup plans. Now, those plans were keeping them alive. The ground was brutal. Frozen loose rocks that shifted under every step. Ice sheets that could send you sliding down a cliff. Wind that cut through clothes and skin like a knife. Rachel's hands were numb even with her gloves. Her face burned with cold even with the scarf wrapped around it. She moved anyway, stopped when needed, used the scope to look ahead before going to each new section of ground. This was the part of fighting that never made it into stories. The grinding hours of being tired and uncomfortable. The slow work of staying alive. Behind her, she heard the sounds of battle starting again. The tanks had arrived. The Marines were being helped. The enemy was pulling back. Their attack was broken. Their leaders were dead. Their confidence was shattered. The valley was being held. Rachel didn't let herself feel like she had won. Winning meant questions. Winning meant investigations. Winning meant someone would want to know who had ignored Protocol 7 and why. She reached the first meeting point by noon. A group of rocks that formed a natural shelter. It was marked on their map with numbers that meant nothing to anyone but the two of them. Sarah wasn't there yet. Rachel waited. Checked her watch. Sarah should have reached this point 30 minutes ago if she moved at normal speed. 45 minutes ago, if she had been slowed down by enemy patrols. An hour passed. Rachel felt the first touch of real fear. Sarah was never late. Even in training, even in practice where timing didn't matter, Sarah had an inner clock that was never wrong. If she wasn't here, something had happened. Rachel forced herself to think like a soldier. Sarah could be stuck, could be hurt, could be taking a different route for reasons Rachel couldn't know. Going to search for her meant showing herself, risking both of them, possibly making a problem where there wasn't one. She waited another hour, used the time to take apart and clean her rifle, check her remaining bullets, eat from the cold food in her pack. Professional habits to keep panic away. Her radio crackled. Sarah's voice, barely a whisper. North route blocked. Taking South Ridge. 2 hours. Rachel breathed out. Got it? See you soon. The message ended. Short, coded, using words that would sound like static to anyone listening. Sarah was alive, moving, delayed, but not in immediate danger. Rachel settled in to wait. The sun moved across the sky. The temperature rose from brutal to just bitter. In the distance, she could see helicopters moving over the valley. Medical helicopters taking out wounded. Supply helicopters bringing in things they needed. The Marines were being taken care of. The system was working now that someone in command had decided they were worth saving. Sarah appeared exactly 2 hours later. She came out of the rocks like she had been born from stone. She looked exhausted, face wind-burned, eyes red-rimmed, moving with the careful steps of someone who had used up almost everything they had. Ran into a patrol, Sarah said quietly, dropping her pack. Had to go 5 miles east. Avoided being seen. Hid in a crack in the rocks for an hour while they searched. Sarah pulled out her water bottle and took a long drink. They're looking hard. We hurt them. We saved them, Rachel corrected. Same thing. Depends on how you look at it. Sarah sat down heavily. What's the plan? Rachel had been thinking about that for hours. Command knows someone stayed behind. They'll investigate. They'll find evidence. Shell casings, marks in the ground, bullet matching. Eventually, they'll figure out it was us. How long? Days? Maybe a week if we're lucky. Sarah nodded. She had known this was coming. They both had. Court-martial. Best case. Worst case, they make an example of us. Not doing our duty during combat. Refusing direct orders. Working outside the chain of command. Rachel listed the charges like a shopping list of their sins. We could be looking at years in military prison. Worth it. Sarah looked at her sister. 8,000 Marines went home. 1,000 Marines saw another sunrise. Yeah, it's worth it. Rachel wanted to argue. To point out that doing the right thing and being practical weren't the same thing. That sacrifice without a plan was just waste. But she couldn't, because she had made the same choice Sarah had. She had turned off her radio, knowing exactly what it meant. We need to get to the pickup point, Rachel said. Turn ourselves in before they send hunters. Or we disappear. Rachel stared. What? We disappear, Sarah repeated. We're good at being invisible. We walk away. New names, new lives. Let command think we died on that ridge. Sarah, I'm serious. We've got skills. We've got training. We could survive outside the system. As what? Mercenaries? Criminals. Rachel shook her head. That's not who we are. No, we're the people who followed orders until following orders meant watching people die. Then we broke the rules. Sarah's voice was hard. If we turn ourselves in, command destroys us to protect the rules we broke. We become the lesson, the warning, the reason why everyone else has to obey without question. Rachel had no answer, because Sarah was right. That was exactly what would happen. Command couldn't allow their disobedience to go unpunished. The military ran on discipline. If 2 snipers could pick and choose which orders to follow, the entire structure became negotiable. Dad wouldn't have run, Rachel said quietly. Dad died following orders. You want that to be what people remember about us, too. They sat in silence, watching the afternoon light paint shadows across the mountains. 2 sisters, 2 rifles, 2 different ideas of what came next. Finally, Rachel spoke. If we run, we prove them right. That we were reckless. That we put ourselves above the mission. That we can't be trusted. And if we turn ourselves in, we're sacrifices to a system that was willing to let 1,000 Marines die because the paperwork said they were acceptable losses. So what do? Sarah smiled, not with humor, but with the serious understanding of someone who had seen the same problem from every angle. We do what we've always done. We take the shot we can make and deal with what happens later. The pickup point is 40 miles south, Rachel said. Command will have people there. Once we arrive, we're in custody. Then we don't arrive. We find another way. There is no other way. We're in enemy territory. No support. Limited supplies. Rachel checked her bullet count. I've got 22 rounds left. You? 18. 40 bullets between us against an entire area that wants us dead or captured. Sarah shrugged. We faced worse odds this morning when we decided 2 rifles could save a battalion. Rachel couldn't help it. She laughed. A short, sharp bark of recognition. Sarah was right. They had already committed to the impossible. Everything after that was just details. Okay, Rachel said. So we hide. We survive. Then what? Then we get home. Back to the States. We tell our story. Not to command, but to everyone. Public. Media. Make it impossible for them to bury us quietly. Sarah's eyes were bright with the kind of planning that made her dangerous. They can court-martial us, but they can't silence us. Not if the whole country knows what happened in that valley. It was a plan, not a good plan. It had about 100 ways to fail, and maybe 2 ways to work. But it was better than giving up and better than running forever. We'll need to move at night, Rachel said, already thinking about the details. Avoid towns. Live off the land as much as possible. I know a route. Sarah pulled out a folded map from her jacket. It was marked with pencil lines, notes, and different paths. Figure we might need a way out someday. You been planning this? I've been planning for us to have choices. There's a difference. Rachel studied the map. The route Sarah had marked took them through some of the roughest ground in the area. Mountain passes, river valleys, areas where even the enemy didn't patrol regularly. It would take weeks. It would be brutal. People would be hunting them from multiple directions. It might work. When do we move? Rachel asked. Dark. For hours. Sarah put the map away. Get some rest. When we start moving, we don't stop until we're clear. Rachel nodded. She should have felt fear. They were about to become runaways from their own military while trapped in enemy territory. Instead, she felt something else. Purpose. Clarity. The same feeling she had felt on the ridge when she decided to turn off her radio. Some choices weren't about rules or what happened next. Some choices were about looking at yourself in the mirror for the next 50 years. She closed her eyes and tried to rest. In 4 hours, they would begin the longest mission of their lives. No support, no backup, no one coming to save them. Just 2 sisters, 40 bullets, and a long walk home. They moved through darkness like water through cracks. Rachel led the first part, finding her way by the shape of the land, memory, and starlight. No GPS. Those signals could be tracked. No radio. Same problem. Just old-fashioned map skills. Using the mountains as reference points and counting steps to measure distance. Sarah followed 20 yards behind, watching where they had been, making sure they left as few marks as possible. They moved in 30-minute sections, then stopped to listen. Listening was the most important skill when hiding. Your ears told you what your eyes couldn't see. Distant engines, radio chatter, the special sound of organized troops moving through the area. For the first 3 hours, they heard nothing but wind and their own breathing. Then, around midnight, they heard helicopters. The sound came from the north. Multiple helicopters, probably search aircraft with heat-sensing cameras. They were sweeping the ridge where Rachel and Sarah had been positioned, looking for bodies, looking for evidence, looking for the snipers who had saved a battalion and vanished. Rachel and Sarah pressed themselves into a ditch, covering themselves with loose rocks and plants. The heat-blocking blankets in their packs would hide their body heat, but only if they stayed perfectly still. Even the slight warmth of breath could show up on sensitive equipment. The helicopters passed overhead. Searchlights painted the rocks in harsh white light. Rachel counted seconds between sweeps, figuring out their search patterns. They were being thorough. Someone important wanted answers. After 20 minutes, the helicopters moved on, continuing their grid search to the west. Rachel and Sarah waited another 30 minutes to be sure, then came out of cover and kept moving. By dawn, they had covered 12 miles. Not fast, but steady, and more importantly, they had moved sideways from the direction command would expect. The pickup point was south. They were heading southwest toward the border areas where authority got loose and the ground made chasing people difficult. They found shelter in an abandoned shepherd's hut, barely more than stacked stones and part of a roof, but enough to hide them during daylight hours. Sarah took first watch while Rachel tried to sleep. She couldn't. Her mind kept going back to the valley, to the young Marine who had been digging uselessly in frozen ground. Was he alive? Had the backup arrived in time? Would he ever know who had been on that ridge? Probably not. The military would classify the incident. The official record would show that the battalion was helped by regular forces, that casualties were acceptable, that rules were followed. The sisters who had ignored orders to save them would become a footnote, if they were mentioned at all, unless they made it home, unless they told the story themselves. Rachel drifted into uneasy sleep, her hand still wrapped around her rifle. Sarah woke her 4 hours later. Movement east, maybe 3 miles. Rachel was instantly alert. What kind? Foot patrol. Sounds organized. Could be ours, could be theirs. Either way, we don't want to be seen. They packed quickly and moved deeper into mountains. The ground was working against them now. The higher they climbed, the more exposed they became. But being exposed was better than being captured. They traveled for 6 more hours, stopping often to check behind them. The patrol Sarah had heard never appeared. Maybe it had turned back. Maybe it was still searching. Maybe it was working with other units to set up a net. By nightfall, they had gained another 15 miles. 27 total. A marathon distance under normal conditions. In mountains with full gear while hiding from pursuit, it was exceptional. It was also unsustainable. They couldn't keep this pace for weeks. We need to find supplies, Sarah said during their night stop. Water especially. We're down to half a bottle each. Rachel knew they had passed several streams, but water in this region was risky without cleaning. They had purification tablets, but limited supply. Food was also becoming a problem. Their rations would last maybe 4 more days if they were careful. There's a village, Rachel said, checking her map. 20 miles south-southwest. Remote. Probably not worth military attention. We could buy supplies. With what money? We've got American dollars and military script. Both will mark us as foreigners. Sarah pulled out a small pouch from her pack. Inside were gold coins. Local money from their first arrival, meant for emergency use with informants. Maybe $50 worth total. Emergency enough? Sarah asked. Rachel nodded. We go in separately. You buy food. I buy water and supplies. Meet at the northern checkpoint. 1 hour maximum. And if one of us doesn't make it out, the other keeps moving. Rachel said it matter-of-factly, but the words tasted like ash. The thought of continuing without Sarah was unbearable. But feelings were a luxury they couldn't afford. They reached the village around midnight. It was small, maybe 30 buildings, mostly dark. A few lights showed in windows. Somewhere, a dog barked at shadows. Sarah went first. She had a gift for blending in, for moving through spaces without drawing attention. Rachel watched from a distance as her sister entered a small shop that was still open, probably serving locals who worked night shifts or travelers passing through. Rachel approached from the other side, finding a different shop. The owner was an old man, half asleep behind his counter. She used hand signals and her limited language skills to buy water bottles, dried fruit, and bread. The man barely looked at her, taking the coins and making change with the automatic movements of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She was back on the street in 10 minutes. Sarah came out of her shop 5 minutes later. They met at the northern edge of the village, exchanged nods, and kept walking. It wasn't until they were a mile away that Sarah spoke. Someone was asking about Americans. Rachel's hand tightened on her rifle. In the shop? Outside. I heard it through the window. Man asking if anyone had seen foreign soldiers. Offering money. Bounty hunters or intelligence gathering. Either way, someone knew they were in the region. They picked up their pace. The village had been a risk, but a necessary one. Now it was a marker on the map that would tell their hunters which direction to search. For 3 more days, they moved through mountains, climbing, descending, following ridges and stream beds, avoiding roads and towns, living off the supplies they had bought and whatever they could find growing wild. On the 4th day, they heard helicopters again, closer this time. The search pattern had shifted. Whoever was hunting them had adjusted their search area. They found something, Rachel said. A track, a sign. We left something. Or they're guessing better than we're hiding, Sarah countered. That night, they made a decision. Instead of continuing southwest toward the border, they would turn directly south, then loop east. A longer route, but one that would take them through ground too rough for helicopters to search well. It added a week to their journey. Maybe 2. They would run out of supplies. They would have to risk another village or find another source. But they would be alive. The 5th day, the weather turned. Snow began falling. Light at first, then heavy. Visibility dropped to just a few yards. Temperature dropped fast. It was a kind of storm that killed unprepared travelers. Rachel and Sarah had trained in worse. They used the storm as cover, pushing through conditions that would stop helicopters and halt foot patrols. They covered 20 miles in 18 hours, leaving tracks that would be erased by snowfall within minutes. When the storm finally broke, they were 40 miles from where the search had been focused. They had gained breathing room, but Rachel knew it wouldn't last. Someone wanted them badly enough to spend resources. Command didn't chase ghosts unless those ghosts represented a problem. And 2 snipers who had ignored Protocol 7 were definitely a problem. The question was how much of a problem, and how far would Command go to solve it. They found the abandoned military outpost on day 9. It sat on a ridge looking over a narrow valley. It was one of dozens of positions that had been built during earlier wars and then left to fall apart when the fighting moved somewhere else. The walls were crumbling. The roof had mostly fallen in. But the foundation was strong, and the location gave them a great view of the land below. More importantly, it had a hidden supply stash. Every outpost kept supply stashes, hidden stores of bullets, medical supplies, and food. The military rarely came back to get them when they left. Too much work for too little reward. But for 2 runaways running low on everything, a stash was like finding treasure. Sarah found it under a loose stone in what used to be the communications room. A metal container, sealed and buried, untouched for years. Inside were 6 boxes of bullets that fit their rifles, bandages, water cleaning tablets, and a dozen military meals that were probably expired but still safe to eat. Someone's looking out for us, Sarah said, checking the dates on the bullets. Or we're just lucky, Rachel replied. But she felt it too, a sense that the universe was helping them keep moving forward. They spent the night in the outpost, taking turns keeping watch. Rachel took the 2nd shift, staying awake in the hours before dawn when attacks were most likely. She watched the valley below, looking for movement, for lights, for any sign they had been followed. Nothing, just wind and darkness and the distant cry of a night bird. When Sarah took over at dawn, Rachel finally let herself think beyond just surviving. They had made it nearly 100 miles. They were getting close to the border region. Not an official border with checkpoints and customs, but the fuzzy area where one country's control faded and another's hadn't quite taken hold. If they could reach that area, they could find people who didn't care about military rules. Smugglers, traders, people who moved goods, and people across borders for the right price. With the coins they had left and possibly their weapons to trade, they might be able to arrange transport to somewhere safer. From there, it was a matter of finding an embassy, talking to friendly reporters, and telling their story before Command could bury it. It was a long shot, but all their shots had been long. Thinking out loud, Sarah said, sitting down beside her, About home. About what happens if we make it. When we make it, Rachel smiled. When? Right. You having doubts? I'm being realistic. We broke every rule. We're going to pay for that. Maybe, but we'll pay on our terms, not theirs. Sarah checked the valley below. You know what Dad used to say about consequences? Which quote? He had about 100. The one about owning your choices. He said the worst thing a Marine could do wasn't make a mistake. It was make a mistake and then pretend someone else was responsible. Sarah glanced at her sister. We're owning this. All of it. That counts for something. Rachel nodded. It did count. Maybe not in a court-martial, but in the internal record they would both carry forever. They moved out at mid-morning, leaving the outpost as empty as they had found it. The stash had extended their timeline. They could push for another week, maybe 2, before supplies became critical again. The ground was changing. The high mountains were giving way to foothills, which would eventually flatten into the border plains. Easier travel, but less cover. They would need to be more careful. On day 11, they came across people, a small group, 6 or 7 individuals traveling on foot with pack animals. Not military, probably traders or nomads moving goods between areas that didn't show up on official maps. Rachel and Sarah watched from a distance, trying to decide. These people might have information. They might have supplies to trade. They might also have radios. Might be willing to report foreign soldiers for a reward. Your call, Sarah said quietly. Rachel studied the group through her scope. Their body language was relaxed. They weren't moving like soldiers. They stopped to rest, to water their animals, to share food. Just people trying to make a living in a hard land. We approach openly, Rachel decided. Weapons visible but not threatening. See if they'll trade. They moved down from their watching spot, making noise on purpose, so they wouldn't look like they were setting up an ambush. The traders spotted them right away. They got tense and reached for whatever weapons they carried. Then they saw it was just 2 women, alone, moving without aggression. The leader stepped forward. He was old, maybe 60, with the kind of weathered face that came from decades under harsh sun. He spoke in the local language, which Rachel barely understood. She replied in slow, careful words. We want to trade. Food for gold. The old man studied them. His eyes stayed on their rifles, on their gear, on the way they carried themselves. He knew what they were. The question was whether he cared. He named a price. Way too high. 3 times what the supplies were worth. Rachel made a counteroffer. The old man laughed and came down a little. They settled on a price that was still too high, but survivable. Rachel handed over coins. The old man gave them dried meat flatbread and cheese wrapped in cloth. Real food, not military rations. As they were finishing the trade, the old man spoke again. Rachel only caught part of it, but the meaning was clear. Helicopters searching for someone. Many helicopters. Many soldiers. You be careful. Yes. Rachel nodded. Yes, careful. The old man smiled, showing gaps in his teeth. Then he said something else. And this time his meaning was impossible to miss. The Valley Battle. We hear stories. 2 women saved many soldiers. He touched his chest in a gesture of respect. God watches over brave. He knew. Rachel felt Sarah get tense beside her. 1 word to the authorities, 1 radio call, and this would be over. They were at this man's mercy. The old man turned and spoke sharply to his group. They went back to packing, getting ready to move on. Then he looked back at Rachel and Sarah. We see nothing. We go west. You go. He waved vaguely. Wherever you must go. Travel safe. He walked away without waiting for an answer. His group followed. Within minutes, they were distant spots moving across the land. He knew, Sarah said quietly, and said nothing. Rachel watched the traders disappear. Because maybe some stories matter more than rewards. Maybe he lost people in these wars and respects anyone who tried to save others. Or maybe the old man simply didn't care about fights between foreign powers. Either way, he had given them something more valuable than food. He had given them the knowledge that not everyone would hunt them. They continued south. 3 days later, They reached the border zone. There were no signs, no fences, no official markers. But Rachel could sense a change in the land, in the settlements, in the way people moved. This was the margin, the edge, the place where rules loosened and survival was more important than politics. They found a small town that existed mainly to serve the gray market. Goods moved through here that couldn't move through official channels. People passed through who couldn't pass through official borders. Rachel and Sarah needed exactly that kind of passage. They found a fixer in a tea house, a woman in her 40s, missing 2 fingers on her left hand, who did business in a back room filled with smoke and quiet conversations. Rachel explained what they needed in simple terms. Transport across the border. No questions. Cash payment. The woman quoted a price that would take every coin they had, plus their bullets. No bullets, Rachel said. We keep our weapons. The woman shrugged. Then no transport. Bullets are valuable. Your rifles without bullets are just expensive clubs. Sarah caught Rachel's eye. They had a quick conversation, using looks and small movements. They had come too far to fail here. The bullets were insurance, but it was insurance they might never need if they could just cross this last barrier. Agreed, Rachel said, but we keep the rifles. The woman nodded. 3 days. There's a truck convoy leaving for the south. You ride in a container with cargo. Uncomfortable, maybe dangerous. But you cross the border and no one asks questions. How dangerous? Checkpoints sometimes search containers. If that happens, you are not our problem. You hide well or you face consequences. Rachel and Sarah exchanged another look. They had faced worse odds. We'll be ready, Rachel said. The woman collected their bullets and half their remaining coins. The rest would be paid when they arrived safely. As they left the tea house, Rachel felt lighter. Not physically. They had just traded away 2/3 of their fighting ability. But mentally, this was the final obstacle. 3 days and they would be across the border, beyond the immediate reach of military pursuit, free to find their way home. 3 days. They found an abandoned building to shelter in, a burned-out shell that had once been a warehouse. They took turns sleeping, saving energy, preparing mentally for the final push. On the second night, Sarah spoke into the darkness. What do you think happens after? After we tell our story. Honestly, I don't know. Court-martial probably. Maybe prison time. Maybe just discharge. Worth it. Rachel thought about the young Marine in the valley, about the 1,000 lives that had seen another sunrise, about the principle that some orders were meant to be questioned. Yeah, she said, worth it. They waited for the 3rd day, for the truck, for the journey that would take them home. The truck arrived before dawn, exactly as promised. It was a commercial transport, old, diesel-powered, carrying legal cargo in the front containers and less legal materials in the hidden compartments. The driver barely noticed Rachel and Sarah. He simply pointed to a panel on the truck's side that opened to reveal a space maybe 6 feet by 4 feet by 3 feet tall. You fit, the driver said in broken English. You stay quiet. No move when truck stops. We tell you when it's safe. Rachel and Sarah climbed in. The space was smaller than they had been told, cramped and airless. They had to lie on their sides, pressed against cargo crates that smelled of engine oil and something organic that had probably rotted months ago. The panel closed, throwing them into complete darkness. The truck started moving. Rachel tried to track time and direction by feel, counting turns, guessing speed. But after an hour, her sense of where they were going was completely messed up. She had no idea if they were going south, west, or in circles. Beside her, Sarah's breathing was steady. Her sister had always been better at small spaces, some gift of personality that let her shut down fear through pure willpower. Rachel focused on breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, staying calm. This was temporary, uncomfortable, but temporary. The truck stopped, voices outside, multiple voices speaking in official tones. Rachel's language skills weren't good enough to catch every word, but she recognized the rhythm. Security forces, checkpoint guards, people with authority and suspicion. The truck's engine shut off. Someone climbed onto the truck bed, footsteps moving along the containers. The sound of panels being opened, cargo being inspected. The search was thorough. Rachel's hand found Sarah's in the darkness. Squeeze once. Sarah squeezed back. Whatever happened now, happened together. The footsteps came closer, stopped right above their hidden compartment. Rachel held her breath, certain the panel would be ripped open, certain this was the end of their journey. The footsteps moved on. More sounds, more inspection, voices raised and questioned, answered by the driver in tones of bored routine. This happened every crossing. The guards searched because that was their job. The driver put up with it because that was his. After 30 minutes, the engine restarted. The truck resumed motion. They had passed through the checkpoint. Rachel exhaled slowly, relief flooding through her. Sarah's hand was still holding hers. Neither let go for the next hour. When the panel finally opened, daylight stabbed into the compartment like knives. Rachel squinted against the brightness, muscles cramped from hours of not moving. The driver's face appeared in the opening. Across border, 1 hour to city. Then you are not my problem. He closed the panel again, but looser this time. Air and light filtered through gaps. Rachel could see Sarah now, could see the exhaustion and determination in her sister's face. Almost there, Sarah whispered. Almost, Rachel agreed. The truck continued for another hour, then stopped at what sounded like a busy street. The panel opened fully. They climbed out, stiff and aching, into afternoon sunlight and city noise. The driver pointed down the street. Embassy District, 4 blocks. You walk from here. He didn't wait for thanks. The panel closed. The truck pulled away. And Rachel and Sarah were left standing on a street corner in a foreign city, carrying rifles and wearing clothes that marked them as military, even without insignia. They had to move fast. Drawing attention here was dangerous. They found an alley, stripped off their outer tactical gear, and buried it in a dumpster. Underneath, they wore civilian clothes, wrinkled and dirty from days of travel, but unremarkable. The rifles went into hiking bags, broken down into parts that wouldn't be recognized right away. Then they walked toward the Embassy District. 4 blocks became 8 because they took an indirect route, checking for surveillance, making sure they weren't being followed. By the time they reached the embassy gates, it was nearly dusk. The Marines on guard duty looked them over with professional suspicion. 2 exhausted women carrying heavy bags approaching right before closing time. We're American citizens, Rachel said. We need to speak with someone. It's urgent. Nature of your business? Rachel glanced at Sarah. This was it. Once they said the words, there was no taking them back. We're United States Marines, Rachel said, and we need to report an incident. The guard's posture shifted. Do you have identification? Rachel pulled out her military ID. It was battered from 2 weeks of hard travel, but readable. Sarah did the same. The senior guard spoke into his radio. Within minutes, an embassy official appeared. A woman in her 50s, dressed professionally, radiating competence and no-nonsense authority. I'm Margaret Chun, Deputy Chief of Mission. The guard say you're Marines. Yes, ma'am. Captain Rachel Hartwell and Lieutenant Sarah Hartwell. We need to speak with the defense attaché immediately. Chin studied them. You're not on any embassy roster. Where's your unit? That's what we need to discuss with the attaché. Privately, Chin made a decision. Come with me? They were escorted into the embassy compound, through security screening, into a conference room where they waited under the watchful eyes of more guards. Neither Rachel nor Sarah was armed anymore. The guards had taken their rifles politely but firmly. After 20 minutes, a man in a Navy uniform entered. Commander rank insignia, defense attaché, or someone close to it. I'm Commander David Price. I understand you have information about an incident. Rachel took a breath. Here was the moment, the point where they stopped being runaways and became something else. Whistleblowers, maybe, or heroes, or criminals, depending on who was listening. 2 weeks ago, 3rd Battalion Marine Regiment was ambushed in a valley approximately 200 miles north of here. Command issued Protocol 7, ordered all support elements to withdraw. Lieutenant Hartwell and I were positioned as sniper overwatch. We disobeyed that order. We remained in position and provided fire support until reinforcements arrived. The battalion survived. We believed we would face court-martial for our actions. Price's expression didn't change. Protocol 7 is classified. How do you know about it? Because we received the order. And because we broke it. Can you prove your claims? Rachel pulled out a small notebook from her jacket. Every entry she had made during their mission. Coordinates, wind readings, shots taken, times, distances. A complete tactical log of everything that had happened on that ridge. Ballistics will match our rifles. Shell casings are still at the positions. The Marines in that valley can confirm someone provided sniper support. And Command knows 2 snipers went dark exactly when Protocol 7 was issued. Price took the notebook and scanned a few pages. His expression finally changed, not to anger or approval, but to careful calculation. You understand what you're claiming? That you disobeyed a direct order during combat operations? Yes, sir. And you understand potential consequences? Yes, sir. Then why turn yourselves in? You made it across the border. You could have disappeared. Rachel glanced at Sarah. This was the question they had debated during the long nights of travel. Why not just vanish? Why face judgment? Because the truth matters, Rachel said. Because 1,000 Marines lived, and someone needs to explain why Command was willing to let them die. Because if we disappear, the story gets buried. But if we stand up and tell it, maybe something changes. Price was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed a notebook and looked at both sisters. You're both under military authority as of this moment. You'll be held here pending investigation. I'll need to contact Central Command. Get guidance on how to proceed. This is complicated. We understand, sir. I'm not sure you do. Price stood. You saved lives. Command will acknowledge that. But you also broke the chain of command during active operations. The military can't function if everyone gets to choose which orders to follow. You put Command in an impossible position. With respect, sir, Command put itself in that position when it issued Protocol 7, Sarah said. It was the first time she had spoken since entering the embassy. Price gave her a hard look. Then, surprisingly, he almost smiled. That's between you and the court-martial board, Lieutenant. For now, you're both confined to embassy quarters. Marines, escort them to the holding rooms. Rachel and Sarah were led away, separated for the first time in 2 weeks. As the door closed behind her, Rachel felt the weight of everything they had done settle onto her shoulders. They had made it. They were safe. They would tell their story. And then they would face whatever consequences came next. They held Rachel in isolation for 3 days. A small room in the embassy basement. Bed, desk, chair, no windows. Meals delivered by guards who wouldn't make eye contact. She wasn't technically under arrest. No charges had been filed, but she was definitely in custody. The first interrogation came on day 2. 2 officers from the Inspector General's office, a colonel and a major, both wearing the careful expressions of people conducting an investigation that could become politically explosive. They went through Rachel's notebook page by page, cross-referenced her statements against satellite data, battle reports, radio transcripts. They asked the same questions multiple ways, looking for contradictions or exaggerations. Rachel answered everything truthfully. No point in lying. The evidence would either support her or it wouldn't. You claim you shot 47 targets, the major said. That's an extraordinary number for a single engagement. I didn't shoot 47 people. I shot 47 times. How many were effective? I can't confirm. Probably 30, maybe 35. The rest were suppressive fire or shots at equipment. Still remarkable performance. My sister probably matched me. We had good positions, and the enemy gave us targets. The colonel leaned forward. Why didn't you withdraw when ordered? Because withdrawing meant the battalion would be overrun. Protocol 7 is meant to preserve assets. We calculated that our presence could preserve more assets than our withdrawal. That's not your calculation to make, Captain. No, sir. But it was a calculation we made anyway. The interviews continued for hours. They took breaks, came back with new questions, probed for inconsistencies. Rachel answered until her voice was hoarse, then kept answering. On the 3rd day, they brought in Sarah. The sisters were kept separated, seated across a table in the same conference room where they had first made their report. Sarah looked tired but unbroken. They weren't allowed to speak to each other directly. The officers asked questions and directed answers. Lieutenant Hartwell, did your sister order you to remain in position? No, sir. We discussed options and came to the same conclusion independently. So it was a joint decision? Yes, sir. Who turned off their radio first? Sarah glanced at Rachel. Does that matter? It establishes chain of command and responsibility. We both turned off our radios within seconds of each other. I don't know who was first. I don't care. The colonel made a note. You understand that disobeying Protocol 7 is a serious offense. I understand that following Protocol 7 would have been a more serious offense, sir. The interrogation went on. They were looking for something. Evidence of conspiracy, maybe, or proof of premeditation. Some legal angle that would make this easier to prosecute or excuse. Rachel knew they wouldn't find it. She and Sarah had made their decision in the moment, based on the situation in front of them. It wasn't planned. It wasn't malicious. It was just two Marines making a call they thought they had to make. Finally, after 8 hours of questioning, the colonel closed his file. You'll both remain in custody pending command review. A court-martial board is being convened. You'll have access to legal counsel. In the meantime, you're restricted to embassy grounds. Rachel and Sarah were escorted back to their separate rooms. As they passed in the hallway, Rachel caught her sister's eye. Sarah gave the smallest nod. They had done everything they could. Now it was out of their hands. Days passed. Rachel read, exercised in her small room, thought about everything that had led to this point. She tried not to think about worst-case scenarios. Years in military prison, dishonorable discharge, the end of everything they had worked for. But she couldn't stop thinking about the young Marine in the valley, whether he had gone home, whether he knew about the sisters on the ridge. On the 7th day, Commander Price returned. You have a visitor, he said. Not official, not part of the investigation. But someone asked to see you, and I'm allowing it. He led Rachel to a different conference room. Sitting at the table was a man in his 50s, wearing a Marine uniform with colonel insignia. His face was weathered. His eyes were sharp, and something about him was familiar. Captain Hartwell, the colonel said, I'm Colonel Thomas Morrison. I commanded 3rd Battalion. In the valley, Rachel's throat tightened. This was the officer whose Marines she had saved. The one who would have watched his entire command die without intervention. Sit down, Captain. Rachel sat. Colonel Morrison studied her for a long moment. I've been briefed on what you and your sister did. The IG showed me your tactical logs, your fire patterns, your casualty estimates. He paused. You saved my Marines. All of them. And I'm here to tell you thank you. Rachel didn't know what to say. Thank you seemed inadequate. Explaining seemed unnecessary. I'm also here to tell you, Morrison continued, that what you did has created a storm at levels above both our pay grades. Central Command is furious. The Joint Chiefs are arguing about it. Politicians are asking questions. I understand, sir. I'm not sure you do. Protocol 7 exists for a reason. It's meant to prevent small unit leaders from making tactical decisions that have strategic consequences. You and your sister overrode that protocol. You decided you knew better than command. Yes, sir. We did. And you were right. Morrison leaned back. My Marines, 1,000 of them, went home because 2 snipers decided to ignore orders. That's not supposed to happen. It's not how the system works. But it's what happened. Sir, are you testifying at the court-martial? That's why I'm here. I've been asked to provide testimony about the tactical situation, about what would have happened without your intervention, about the effectiveness of Protocol 7 in this context. Rachel waited. This could go either way. Morrison could testify that they saved lives. Or he could testify that they undermined command authority. Both were true. Which truth mattered depended on what the court valued more. I'm going to tell them, Morrison said slowly, that Protocol 7 was a wrong call. That the situation on the ground didn't match the assumptions behind the protocol. That my Marines would have been slaughtered if command's order had been followed. He looked directly at Rachel. I'm going to tell them that you and your sister demonstrated the kind of tactical judgment that the Corps is supposed to train into its leaders. And that if exercising that judgment means court-martial, then the system is broken. The courtroom went silent. I would rather be court-martialed for saving lives than decorated for following orders that led to massacre. Rachel felt something unclench in her chest. Not relief. She was still facing charges. Still looking at possible prison time. But validation. Someone who had been there, who had commanded the Marines they saved, was willing to stand up and say they had done the right thing. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. There are people in command who want to make an example of you, who believe that discipline matters more than outcomes, who think that letting you walk sets a dangerous precedent. Morrison stood. But there are also people, myself included, who think the real precedent is punishing Marines for saving lives. We'll see which side wins. He left. Rachel sat alone in the conference room, processing what she had heard. The court-martial was coming. The judgment would be rendered. But at least now she knew that someone would speak for them. Someone who mattered, whose voice carried weight, who had been in the valley when the bullets were flying. It wasn't much, but it was something. The court-martial started 6 weeks later at Marine Corps Base Quantico. Rachel and Sarah were flown back to the United States under guard. They were processed, given lawyers, and told the formal charges. Disobeying a direct order in time of combat, operating outside established chain of command, unauthorized engagement with enemy forces. The maximum sentence for each charge was years in prison. Combined, they could face decades in military prison. Their lawyer was a captain named Jennifer Reeves, a JAG officer with 12 years of experience in military law. She was honest in their first meeting. The facts aren't in dispute. You disobeyed orders. You broke protocol. Command has documentation of everything. The only question is mitigation. Can we convince the court that your actions were justified under the circumstances? Can we? Rachel asked. Maybe. The challenge is that the military can't function if everyone gets to decide which orders to follow. The court has to balance your specific situation against the broader principle of discipline. Reeves spread out documents on the table between them. Our best argument is necessity defense, that following orders would have resulted in greater harm than disobeying them, but that requires proving command made the wrong call with Protocol 7. We have evidence, Sarah said. The tactical situation, the casualties that would have resulted, Colonel Morrison's testimony, all of which will be countered by the prosecution, arguing that tactical decisions aren't made by captains and lieutenants in the field. They're made by command with access to the larger strategic picture. Reeves looked at both sisters. Be prepared for this to get ugly. The Corps is divided on this. Some people see you as heroes. Others see you as a threat to good order and discipline. The trial will become a stand-in for that larger debate. The court-martial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented their case step by step. Radio transcripts showing the Protocol 7 order. Testimony from the operations officer who had issued it. Expert witnesses explaining why battlefield commanders can't be allowed to make their own decisions. The most damaging testimony came from a brigadier general who had helped write the protocols. Protocol 7 exists precisely because junior officers in the field don't have the information necessary to make strategic decisions. Captain Hartwell and Lieutenant Hartwell believed they were saving lives, but they didn't know what resources were being gathered for rescue. They didn't know the larger operational picture. They made a decision based on incomplete information and got lucky. Next time, that kind of freelancing could trigger an international incident or compromise a larger operation. Reeves cross-examined aggressively. General, were resources being gathered for rescue? The situation was being evaluated. That's not what I asked. Were resources actively being deployed to save 3rd Battalion? The general hesitated. Not at the time Protocol 7 was issued. So the battalion was being abandoned. They were being evaluated as acceptable losses in a fluid tactical situation. Acceptable losses. 1,000 Marines. Acceptable. Reeves let that hang in the courtroom. General, if Captain Hartwell and Lieutenant Hartwell had followed orders, would those Marines have survived? That's impossible to determine. Colonel Morrison determined it. He commanded those Marines. He testified that without sniper support, his battalion would have been overrun by dawn. Do you dispute his assessment? I dispute that Captain Hartwell and Lieutenant Hartwell had the authority to make that calculation. The prosecution rested after 10 days. The court had heard extensive testimony about protocol, about chain of command, about the necessity of discipline in military operations. Now it was the defense's turn. Reeves called Colonel Morrison first. He testified for 6 hours, describing the tactical situation in detail, the enemy positions, the inadequacy of his defensive position, the certainty of being wiped out if dawn had come without support. Morrison paused. The sniper fire changed everything. The enemy lost command cohesion. They lost initiative. They went from confident attackers to confused defenders. That bought us time until reinforcements arrived. The prosecutor cross-examined. Colonel, do you believe junior officers should be allowed to override command decisions? I believe officers should be trained to exercise judgment. That's what Captain Hartwell and Lieutenant Hartwell did. They looked at the situation, made a calculation, and acted accordingly. Even when that action violated direct orders? Morrison paused. I would rather be court-martialed for saving lives than decorated for following orders that led to massacre. The courtroom went silent. Reeves called other witnesses. The young Marine Rachel had watched through her scope. Now Corporal Daniel Hayes, 20 years old, alive because 2 women had defied orders. He testified with tears in his eyes, describing the desperate hours of darkness, the certain knowledge that dawn would bring death, and then the impossible sound of sniper fire from a ridge. They saved us, Hayes said simply. I don't understand why that's a crime. The prosecution objected. The court sustained. Hayes's opinion on legality wasn't relevant, but the emotion was. The court-martial board, 5 officers ranging from major to colonel, watched Hayes testify. They heard the crack in his voice. They saw the impact of Rachel and Sarah's decision measured in a living, breathing human being. Finally, Reeves called Rachel and Sarah themselves. Rachel testified first. She described her thought process clearly, without apology or false modesty. She had weighed options. She had chosen the course of action most likely to preserve life. She had known it violated protocol. She had done it anyway. Did you consider that your actions might encourage other Marines to disobey orders? The prosecutor asked during cross-examination. No, sir. I consider that following orders will result in 1,000 deaths. That seemed like the more significant consequence. You put your judgment above command's judgment. I put the lives of Marines above a protocol that didn't account for the actual situation we faced. The prosecutor pressed harder. Rachel didn't give in. She had spent 2 weeks running through mountains and 6 weeks preparing for this moment. She knew what she had done and why. She wouldn't pretend otherwise to make the court more comfortable. Sarah's testimony was shorter, but equally firm. When asked if she regretted her actions, she answered without hesitation. No, sir, I'd do it again. The trial concluded. Closing arguments were made. The board retired to deliberate. Rachel and Sarah waited for 3 days. They were kept in separate quarters, but allowed brief contact during meals. Neither spoke much. What was there to say? They had told the truth. They had made their case. Now 5 officers would decide their future. On the 4th day, they were called back to the courtroom. The board had reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread during the trial. Media had picked up the story. Twin sisters court-martialed for saving battalion. Public opinion was divided. Veterans groups were loudly supporting Rachel and Sarah. Military leadership was largely silent, letting the process play out. Rachel and Sarah stood at attention as the board filed in. 5 officers, their faces carefully neutral. The president of the board, a colonel with combat decorations from 3 wars, carried a folder containing the verdict. The court-martial board has reached findings on all charges, the colonel announced. The accused will remain standing. Rachel felt Sarah shift slightly beside her. Their shoulders were almost touching. They had faced everything else together. They would face us together too. On the charge of disobeying a direct order in time of combat, we find the accused. The colonel paused, letting the weight settle. Guilty. Rachel's stomach dropped. She had expected this. The facts were undeniable, but hearing it stated formally still hit hard. On the charge of operating outside established chain of command, we find the accused guilty. 2 for 2. 1 more charge remaining. On the charge of unauthorized engagement with enemy forces, we find the accused guilty. 3 guilty verdicts. The maximum sentence now loomed. Years in confinement. Dishonorable discharge. The end of their military careers and possibly their freedom. But the colonel wasn't finished. This board has considered extensive testimony regarding the circumstances surrounding these violations. We have heard from commanders, from Marines whose lives are preserved, from experts on military protocol and tactical decision-making. We have reviewed the tactical situation in detail and assessed the likely outcomes had the accused followed orders. He looked directly at Rachel and Sarah. The board finds that while the accused clearly violated direct orders, they did so in a situation where following those orders would have resulted in catastrophic loss of American lives. We find that their tactical judgment, while outside proper chain of command, was sound and demonstrated the kind of initiative the Marine Corps claims to value in its leaders. Rachel hardly dared to breathe. This was sounding less like condemnation and more like something else. Therefore, while upholding the guilty verdicts on all charges, this board recommends sentencing at the minimum end of available options. The accused are sentenced to a reduction in rank of 1 grade, forfeiture 1 month's pay, and formal reprimand to be placed in permanent record. No confinement, no discharge. The courtroom erupted, spectators talking, reporters scrambling for phones, officers conferring in whispers. The colonel raised his hand for silence. This board further notes that Captain, now First Lieutenant, Hartwell and Lieutenant, now Second Lieutenant, Hartwell demonstrated extraordinary skill, courage, and tactical judgment under pressure. While we cannot endorse violation of protocol, we acknowledge that rigid adherence to protocol in this instance would have resulted in unacceptable casualties. This court-martial should serve as motivation for review of Protocol 7 and similar doctrines to ensure they account for the kind of tactical flexibility demonstrated by the accused. He closed the folder. This court-martial is concluded. The accused are released from custody and returned to duty status, pending administrative processing of these findings. The gavel fell. Rachel and Sarah remained at attention for a moment, processing. They were guilty. They had been convicted. But they weren't going to prison. They weren't being discharged. They had been demoted and reprimanded. But they were still Marines. Captain Reeves was smiling. That's about as good as we could have hoped for. The board threaded a perfect needle, upheld discipline while acknowledging you saved lives. Colonel Morrison appeared from the gallery. Congratulations. You're officially criminals with commendations. Sir, Rachel wasn't sure she had heard right. The board included a commendation in your files. You'll have both a formal reprimand and a formal commendation. Future commanders will have to decide which matters more. He shook both their hands. I've already decided. If either of you want a position in my command, you've got it. Sarah laughed. The first genuine laugh Rachel had heard from her in months. Are you sure you want snipers who don't follow orders? I want snipers who know when orders are wrong and have the courage to act accordingly. That's different than not following orders. Morrison smiled. Think about it. No rush. He left. Other people approached. Marines from 3rd Battalion who had attended the trial. Officers who wanted to shake their hands. Even a few reporters who got past security. Through it all, Rachel and Sarah stood together, still processing what had happened. They had been convicted, punished. Their careers would always carry the mark of this court-martial. Future promotions would be harder. Some doors would close. But they had survived. They had told their story. And most importantly, 1,000 Marines had gone home because 2 sisters decided that some principles mattered more than protocol. As the courtroom cleared, Rachel looked at Sarah. You okay? Yeah. You? Yeah. They didn't need to say more. They had made their choice on a frozen ridge at dawn. They had faced consequences. They had accepted judgment. And they would live with the results, whatever those turned out to be, because some shots were worth taking, even when you knew you'd pay for pulling the trigger. What now? Sarah asked. Rachel thought about it. They had been through combat, through pursuit, through trial. They had been convicted and vindicated in the same breath. They had lost rank and gained respect. They had broken rules and upheld principles. Now we go back to work, Rachel said. We're still Marines. We're still snipers. Someone still needs people who can make the hard shots. Sarah nodded. Together? Always together. They walked out of the courtroom side by side. Twin sisters who had saved a battalion at dawn and paid the price at sunset, ready for whatever came next. Because that's what Marines did. They adapted. They overcame. They moved forward. And sometimes when the situation demanded it, They ignored protocol and did what was right instead of what was ordered. The story would follow them for the rest of their careers. The Hartwell sisters, the snipers who defied Protocol 7, the women who chose lives over orders. Some would use it to question their judgment. Others would use it to celebrate their courage. Rachel didn't care about either interpretation. She cared that Corporal Daniel Hayes had gone home to his family, that 1,000 Marines had lived to fight another day, that somewhere in the records there was an account of what happened when 2 women decided that protocol was negotiable, but human life wasn't. That was enough. The rest was just noise. They stepped out into Virginia sunlight, diminished in rank but unbroken in spirit, ready for the next mission. Because the war was never really over. It just took different forms. And somewhere, sometime, there would be another valley, another battalion, another impossible choice. And if Rachel and Sarah were there, they would make the same decision again. Protocol be damned. Some things were worth fighting for, worth risking everything for, worth standing alone for. And the lives of Marines they would never meet, fighting in valleys they would never see, were worth 2 careers, 2 convictions. 2 women who knew that courage sometimes meant saying no to the people who thought they had all the answers. They had fired their shots at dawn. They had faced judgment at sunset. And they had survived to see another day. That was victory. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next one.